I'm so thankful. We were saved by the Democrats. Don't often say that, but it's true in this case.
You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Tucker Carlson has been consistently making waves in the conservative politics world ever since he came out against Trump and against this Iran war and opposing Trump on issues like Israel. He's been very strong on that, voicing his opposition to this war, not just in strategic terms, but in moral terms, as well as America's support of Israel, criticizing it on moral terms, that, you know, it's a genocide and what they're doing over there is terrible and we can't be supporting that. And while there's the question of how much of it is honest, how much does he really believe this anti-war stance versus is it just opportunism? He sees that that's a popular thing at the moment, but also my concern with not just him, but a lot of these conservative guys who have turned tail on Trump, what about their ideology has actually changed? In many of these people's cases, it's nothing. They haven't actually changed their worldview at all. And so that's the interesting thing about this, is they're trying to carve out a way to criticize Trump on the war by saying this isn't what we voted for, this isn't what he said he was. However, there's no acknowledgement of the fact that the reason we've been kind of sleepwalked into this terrible position as a country is because people bought into these guys' cultural arguments. So here's a couple clips, first of all, where you can see sort of where his head is at about some of this stuff. And he also makes an interesting comment here about having talked to somebody in the CIA. So here's that.
People, yeah, of course, there are a ton of people like that still in the administration. Who would work in an administration? You're not going there for the money. You're not going in there for the hours. You're not going there for the prestige, I hope, because there is none. You're going there because you want to serve your country and you like believe that this guy can make America great again. A lot of people believe that. I believe that, sort of. And so, yeah, they're still there, for sure. There are a lot of people who love the United States in a normal way, not a kind of chest-beating, creepy, bloodthirsty way, but like a nice way. Like, it's a great country. Let's not wreck it. There are a bunch of people like that in the administration, including at CIA. I hate to say that, but it's just true. Talked to one this morning. There are a lot of countries that we describe as tyrannies that are more responsive to their population than ours is. And I would name every Gulf country. They're all monarchies. All 6 of them are monarchies. The GCC. It's hereditary. You can't run for emir, okay? You're born into it or not. And yet those governments, I've seen it firsthand a lot over years, and I know some of those people, but they're really kind of aware at all times of what their population wants. And they make a good, I mean, they may blow a lot of money on hookers and private planes and all that stuff, and that's well documented. But they do not ignore the baseline concerns of their populations because, well, for a lot of reasons, but one, because it's stupid to do that because you get a revolution. I feel like our country is less representative of the views of its population than almost any, maybe any I've ever visited. Europe is pretty close. Canada, of course, is worse than we are. But other than that, like we lead the world in non-representative government. What the country was like not that long ago, before 9/11. Like, you know, it was like a silly, frivolous country in some ways. Everyone always said that, oh, you're so shallow. Yeah, fair. But also really happy, pretty happy country, really.
Cohesive, yeah.
Yeah, and yes. Well, that, you know, underlying all of this is that fact, unfortunately. I wish that weren't true, but it is. Yeah, cohesive. It was a cohesive country, demographically cohesive. Diversity was not our strength. It was our weakness, and the people pushing it knew that, right? There was a concerted effort to destroy the country.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I talked to one this morning. Tucker Carlson, for anybody who does know, for anybody who doesn't know, his family does have some CIA ties. His father seemed to be a part of some kind of CIA propaganda program involving the radio. And most people don't just have casual conversations on a Friday morning with CIA members of the CIA. But I think also what's interesting here is how dark he gets immediately when someone mentions that, you know, essentially the demographic of America has changed, that it used to be a more cohesive country. So he hears that word cohesive and he instantly goes to this sort of dark place about, oh, well, yes, there are people who have very purposely been tearing apart the social fabric by trying to. So this is where it gets into the great replacement theory and like this sort of purposeful demographic change that Democrats have essentially done to make the country more liberalized. This is a theory that Tucker Carlson has been beating the drum of on his program for years. It's straight up Nazi shit, and it's what not just conservatives but sort of psycho-conservatives do with this issue of immigration. They take the fact that immigration is something that is always happening and happens because of various political conflicts or wars like ones that we start, and they turn it into like this invasion that's happening, or it's something that people are doing to import people deliberately to replace you. And so that can be the US government, liberals, Nancy Pelosi. It also can be the Jew that is often a target of that type of conspiracy. And so he says, and so it's important to note that he is still 100% on board with that. His thoughts have not changed on that a wink. And that ties in with this stuff about how he's like, oh, thank the Democrats because they are going against Israel now. It's starting to not make very much sense, but he's not changing his mind on that in the same way that he claims to have changed his mind on Trump. And he also says this interesting stuff about monarchies. And he makes a point that I think a lot of people would agree with, or at least would be interested to hear, that there are countries that we consider to be authoritarian, like monarchy style governments that are more responsive to their people than America is, because they actively are trying to avoid revolution, whereas American leaders kind of don't care, don't feel like they have to fear that. So while there's a point he's making there, he's also kind of caping for the type of Gulf countries that people have been skeptical of Tucker Carlson's ties to for a couple years now. And that also does coincide with his turn on Israel, being so harsh against Israel. Again, I think that's a great thing. I'm glad he's out there going hard on Israel, but it does have this sort of like, it's certainly not a left-wing critique, I'll say that. And it's interesting that in other countries he notes as being non-responsive to their people, he notes Europe and Canada, two other countries that uphold democratic principles, which Tucker Carlson, that is something he claims to care about, like individual freedom, democracy. And yet pretty consistently he points to monarchical nations as being more free or more stable or more clean or whatever. And it's just an interesting commonality in Tucker Carlson's worldview, and the fact that he points back to liberalism as being this sort of fundamentally corrosive thing, like that's what makes governments not responsive to their people, and also is responsible for this sort of demographic change and purposeful destroying of a country like America. And so that's where I want to get deeper into his current worldview on where things are at, as well as the fact that, as others have noted, these guys are already kind of setting the stage for J.D. Vance to now be presented as the alternative to Trump, which, first of all, I don't think is going to work very well, but also it's an interesting sleight of hand because Trump is supposed to be the alternative to typical Republican politics. J.D. Vance is a lot closer to typical Republican politics. It's sort of repackaged, and he has a different kind of more working class focused way of presenting the same ideas, but by and large J.D. Vance is closer to typical Republican politics than Trump is. And so they're all just going to immediately start saying, well, this guy's obviously the better alternative to what? To Democrats, to liberals, because of the immigration, because of the abortion, etc. So here's where he gets into that, and you can see not only that this is not a guy whose worldview has changed, but this is somebody who has a specific agenda to try to solidify the forms of conservatism that he likes so that they don't get destroyed by this current strain of Trumpism.
When you have broken with the Republican Party, does that mean you have at least slightly broken with J.D. Vance, or do you still see him as someone who could fix things?
I mean, well, first let me just say, let me take issue with the term catastrophic Iran war. That's not strong enough. I think of a new adjective. I can't, but like the war that, ends the world we knew, that brings America, brings American empire not to a kind of gradual, sensible wind down, but to like a screeching, disastrous halt. That's what this war is. It's the worst, dumbest thing any American president in my lifetime has done. So there's that. JD. Yeah, I mean, I know JD Vance really well. I make a life rule of not becoming friends with politicians because that's not a good idea, obviously. And for many years, I thought of myself as like a journalist, and like that's not allowed. I mean, all kinds of reasons, and I don't really like them, by the way. They're all kind of mediocre. I became friends with JD Vance. Like, I really like JD Vance. I really like his wife. like his children. I think he's really smart. I think he's a decent man. I don't agree with him on everything, obviously, but I really like him, and I pushed him hard on Trump, both when he ran for Senate in Ohio and to pick him as vice president. Others did the same. I was very aggressive about it, and I think I had some effect on that. So it's really obvious. Like, I love J.D. Vance. I still feel that way. I don't know exactly how much effect a vice president can have. He's got no constitutional power to send or withdraw troops. He's not in charge, really. He's the stand-in in case something happens. So, I mean, I would just say the obvious. The guy hasn't had any actual authority except that granted to him by Trump. I think it's tough for anybody affiliated with Trump, associated with Trump, to have a political future anytime soon. I mean, this is so bad. If we have a real energy, let's just say oil goes to 120. What does that look like in the United States? Well, like, what actually would happen? This is a poor country in a lot of ways. And I live in a poor area, so I see it a lot. What would happen with oil at 120, 130? Honestly, like, nobody talks. We're also like in ideology world, but what's the actual material effect on Americans if that happens? That is again, I'm searching for words, but that is so bad that anybody associated with it is going to be badly damaged. I don't know if that's going to happen. It certainly could happen. That's confirmed. So, I don't know what the future is. I know I'm freaked out by how hating whites is the center. Hating whites and loving abortion, kind of related actually, are at the very center of the Democratic Party. So anyone who puts race hate at the center of his political program and killing people at the center of his political program, like, I can't support that. I would never support that. You hate the whites and you're for abortion? No. Just like, no. So where does that leave people? If the Republican Party is, obviously they're in slavery to Israel, obviously, and the Democratic Party hates whites and wants to open the borders to sub-Saharan Africa and like loves abortion, there's no choice. That's not I can't choose either one of them. How could I? These are not small things. I mean, these are big things. This is not like an argument over the marginal tax rate.
So one thing Tucker Carlson does pretty repetitively is making strong statements, strong moralistic statements. I would never support a country that does that because I just wouldn't. I could never do that. He says a lot of things like that throughout this conversation. I'm not leaving America. I'm going to die here. Strong moralistic statements. It's been shown pretty clearly that he contradicts himself on that. There was an interview he did, I think, with New York Times where he made some strong statement about how I've never said that. I know I've never said that because I never would say that. And it turns out he said that verbatim. So I think that he just kind of reflexively makes these very strong statements. And you can see him contradict himself literally in the same sentence where he says, I never make friends with politicians. It's wrong. You shouldn't do that. As a journalist, you shouldn't do that. But I made friends with J.D. Vance. So the only reason for saying the beginning part there was to make it clear, like, I know that it holds no weight for me to be saying I'm friends with J.D. Vance because that just makes me look like a member of the establishment. So let me make it clear that normally I would never do this. But J.D. Vance is just such a fun, charismatic guy that I just couldn't help be friends with him and friends with his family. There's just something different about him. He said the same thing about Lindsey Graham, by the way. Even though he supposedly hates Lindsey Graham and everything he stands for, Lindsey Graham is a great guy. I always found him very charming. But what he says at the end there about this is why I could never vote for Democrats and this is what the Democratic Party is. This is why it's very important to take Tucker Carlson seriously and to not go along with this thing about how he, needs to be on the team because he's going against Trump and we need to be forgiving of people like him. Because that framing that he says, the Democratic Party, their central idea is abortion and hating white people. And so, of course, I can't support that. And this isn't a conversation about the marginal tax rate. If you're wondering how we've gotten into this situation with Trump being a madman, this war that doesn't seem like we're going to be able to get out of, we've already lost and we still can't get out of it. If you're wondering how we got to this point, it's because of what Tucker Carlson said there. It's because of that worldview. And the fact that he and others like him, everyone from Joe Rogan to Tim Dillon to everyone on the right-wing side, framing American politics in those terms is exactly why we are now governed by a madman and what has damaged American politics to the point where, in even Tucker Carlson's opinion, it could lead to the collapse of the empire. because he says this isn't a conversation about the marginal tax rate, but it is. That's exactly what this conversation is about. And it's the fact that Tucker Carlson would rather make moralistic claims about the nature of immigration or the nature of abortion or the fact that Democrats hate white people as a core position. That's the type of moralism that prevents us from having the conversation about the marginal tax rate, which is what this current strain of Democrats, who he praises in a moment here, that is what they are fighting for, is to change that top marginal tax rate, to change the amount of our tax dollars that are going to Israel, etc. So the choice is clear. The choice is clear which of these parties is better. And he makes that argument earlier about how, our American government isn't responsive to its people. And I agree with that. I think a lot of people agree with that. We can all sort of perceive that in our daily lives. But he makes a point here in a second that contradicts what he's saying about why he can never vote for Democrats. Because he essentially says here that the Democratic Party is more responsive to their voters on this issue of Israel, and that is why they voted against the recent amendment to merge U.S. and Israel's military, which is something that Tucker Carlson opposes. The entire Republican Party voted for that. Democrats prevented it from passing for now. So here's Tucker Carlson praising them for that. This is a clip that's been going around a decent amount.
But what's interesting is this is like the last opportunity for the democratic process to stop this, small d democratic process, and the big D Democratic Party stopped it. And the reason they did is because they're afraid of their own voters. They understand, like, I'm very upset about Israel. That's why I was interviewing Dennis Kucinich, lifelong Democrat. He was a wonderful man, by the way, actually. I don't mean to, he's probably a bad example because we actually do agree on a lot, but there are plenty, Ro Khanna, for example, we don't agree on much, but we strongly agree on this. Well, I'm still an outlier on the right, and you guys are too. But on the left, I know from going through airports 2 days ago, this is a huge issue on the left, and God bless them for making it that. Against the wishes of their leaders, by the way. Chuck Schumer doesn't want to talk about this, but a lot of Democratic voters do. And I just think representatives watching those three races in New York City, those primaries where Mondani got behind three Democratic socialists and they all beat incumbents. Like, wow, how'd that happen? Israel. That's how it happened. I'm so thankful. We were saved by the Democrats. Don't often say that, but it's true in this case.
Yeah, so this is where the whole thing kind of falls apart, because it's a sane thing that he's saying here, and he probably knows that he's going to make some headlines by saying it. God bless them for doing that, and I'm so thankful to the Democrats. And he makes a true point, which is that the only reason that Democrats voted this way is because they are responsive to their voters. They're afraid of their voters in the way that he put it. So that's true. It's not because the Democratic representatives are just better people, although in most cases I would say they are, but it's because they know that the base's opinion on this has changed. It has shifted, and they no longer have the political cover to continue voting in favor of Israel. They know that they're going to get killed over this and that people are paying attention. So Republicans also know the same thing. Their base's views on this are changing. Not so much the older people, but the younger people that they need to keep in order to be politically relevant. They are not in favor of this Israel stuff, and the only way Republicans are going to survive with that group of people is if they vote against Israel. So clearly, they have not perceived that their political future is dependent on that, and they still feel that they have political cover to vote with Israel. And so this is where this premise of how, America or Canada or Europe is so irresponsive to its people, he's pointing to like liberal governments. That's why he emphasizes Canada when he says that Canada's worse than we are. He says we lead the world in governments that are unresponsive to their people. And yet, a government being unresponsive to its people, a government not having to listen to the broad working base of its country, is explicitly a right-wing principle. It's actually a specifically Republican principle, because the whole idea of a republic is you elect a representative who then acts on your behalf. But even he's making the case that it's clear that the Democratic Party is more responsive to its base and is better on this issue. I would argue the reason for that is because Democrats have cultivated a culture of caring about human rights, whereas Republicans just absolutely have not. So even though Democrats tried to resist on an establishment level changing their view on Israel, the reason that the floor is changing under them faster is because their entire premise is built on human rights. So once this became a human rights issue, it was inevitable that Democrats were going to have to change their stance on it. And they still haven't fully. There's still progress to be made here. In many cases, this was kind of a show vote and not the most important vote when it comes to this amendment. It's going to come up again. But my final point is, Tucker Carlson is kind of disguising his pretty insane Nazi-esque ideology ideology underneath this ability to articulate rational politics very well. So he articulates rational political points, but then he's precluding a lot of the right-wingers who listen to his program from ever considering the idea that Democrats, just on the whole, because of what the party itself claims to believe, at least, is just better than Republicans. Leads to better results, they're better at governing, and even on the case of Israel, they're changing their tune faster and more responsive to their base. He cannot allow his listeners to think that, so he has to mischaracterize them as being obsessed with abortions or trying to demographic replace you, etc. And the reason for that is because he's racist. He's obsessed with race. He was raised that way. He was raised to be obsessed about these things, about demographic and stuff like that. And that's why to him, it's just an accepted truth. It's not something that he feels he needs to even litigate with his audience anymore. And so that's not going to go away. They're going to just continue to launder it through J.D. Vance or even Thomas Massie if he ends up being the Republican nominee. This act Tucker Carlson's doing about a third party is not real. He's going to go back to voting Republicans, and that is explicitly why he says, absurd things about what Democrats actually think. And meanwhile, he's still, very proud to be a conservative. So just remember that those conservative ideals that Tucker Carlson professes is exactly what got him to promote Trump in the first place. And that's why they're going to promote the next huckster who's promising the same thing, and the result is going to be the same. And don't expect Tucker Carlson, no matter how clever he is in changing his political position, to ever truly come to grips with that.
I'm in the pocket, and they know they can't slow it, can't stop shit. How the game so cold, so toxic. Can't drop cause they're in somebody's pocket. For me that's not